Okay, so I did prepare a PowerPoint slide for today, and I'm having technical difficulties for whatever reason. It's not allowing me to share. So I'm not entirely sure of why that could be. So I can see it on my end, so I'm gonna use it to follow today's discussion and to guide today's conversation. I do apologize that for whatever reason you all can't see it. You're not missing much in the way of graphics, but I know it is helpful to see the information in front of you as well as listen to it. So I wished I would have known ahead of time that that was the case.
Nicole, if you email that to me, can I share it easier maybe?
Possibly. I can try that really quick. I think part of the problem might be that I'm not in my regular Wi-Fi, so it may be an issue with connectivity, which is also the reason why I don't have my video on today. Okay, Marcy, it's coming your way right now. Okay, Marcy, so in the event that you get that, it's going to be on slide, starts on slide 18, and the bulk of our information starts on slide 20. So the title of today's discussion is Proactive Strategies and Conflict Resolution. You recall, if you've watched or joined us in the past, we've been focusing around challenging behaviors. I've said it before, I say it every time, we're not going to solve challenging behaviors in these conversations, but it is a great way to sort of get us all together thinking the same thing, sharing similar information, sharing experiences, and making those connections to your own work. I always appreciate those that are willing to unmute. Also, there's access to the chat box. So between Marcy and I, we'll do our best to monitor the chat box and answer any questions. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question or a story to share, something like that. We'll do our best to wrap up by 3 o'clock. It is a 1-hour training, and a 1-hour certificate will be available at the end, even for those watching the recording later. And those tend to be a little tricky, but we're gonna do our best to make sure that you all have access to that, even if it requires some follow-up emails later. So we've focused in on active supervision, so the role of the adult in a school setting, what that looks like and what we mean by actively being engaged with children with and without challenging behaviors. We've also talked about classroom factors, so whether you're in a classroom of 16, 20, 22 children, or whether you're a one-on-one ed tech perhaps, or working in a Title I classroom, a special purpose classroom where there's less ratio, less students attending perhaps, the factors of the classroom matter, right? The environment matters. So that was our second conversation. Our third conversation last week was around child interaction. And so maintaining that mindfulness around what we're bringing to an interaction with the child and what the child is bringing. And today we'll follow up with proactive strategies and also conflict resolution. So the bulk of the information today is from the book I've referenced, Uncover the Roots of Challenging Behavior, written by Michelle Salcido. I've shared that information before, happy to share it again if needed for those that are interested. Okay. So the book goes from, it sort of follows along with the steps we've been following with, so looking at the classroom, looking at interactions, and then it wraps up with these proactive strategies. So one thing that I think we can all agree to is the need to teach social skills to children. They don't all come to us with the same background and the same experiences. So those social skills, those skills in interaction, sharing, cooperation, impulse control, those need to be taught to many children. Those need to be like systematically addressed and called out, and then they need to be given strategies of how to sort of work through those emotions and work through those skills in future scenarios. So we've referenced that this book kind of gives way to like a gardening metaphor, right? So in today's discussion, it's going to be relating to supporting the plants, supporting the children that are in your care, okay? So I'm hoping that that will resonate with you as we move forward. So in lots of situations that I've been in personally as an educator with young children, as well as situations that I've observed in classrooms, it's not uncommon for adults to sort of hit some of these bullet points that I'm going to mention to you. And these are things that we would consider to be less effective responses to challenging behavior, okay? It's that these responses that I'm going to discuss next do not effectively teach social skills. And as I sort of go through them, just mentally think to yourself if you're guilty or not, right? It's not meant to call out like, oh, you've been doing this wrong, of course, but just be mindful of whether or not these are things that you have done yourself or things that you've said and done, that you've seen said and done by other teachers. So the first one is punishments. Okay, really common tactic for students with challenging behaviors is to give them a punishment, to give them a consequence. Those are not always going to be effective, of course. It's not teaching the child that what they did is wrong. It's just simply saying, this is wrong and this is your consequence, as opposed to giving them strategies, ways that they can do it differently next time, perhaps. The next one is behavior charts. So I have seen these in probably more classrooms than not, to be perfectly honest with you. So in most cases, the children who are from the start more able to understand and follow social expectations get additional praise for their behavior, right? So in a behavior chart, a common one I see looks like a street light, the red, green, yellow. Right? So children whose names are in the green circle might be represented as making good choices, following the expectations, and all around doing a good job. Children whose names get moved to the yellow circle on that behavior chart typically have been given some type of a reminder about their behavior, that maybe they're starting to make some bad choices. And then, of course, the red one is for children who have had multiple reminders and their behaviors are not following expectations, okay? So those who are not in who are not following the social skills and expectations, they do not learn what they need to change nor how to do it by having their names moved to a different colored circle. Okay, that's just repeatedly reminding them of their social failings, okay, which often causes them grief and leads to even more challenging behaviors. So you're not, in fact, helping the child move through a social skill or a social interaction that's causing them challenging behaviors. You're just drawing attention to the fact that they're doing it wrong, right? So a behavior chart doesn't teach children classroom expectations or how to meet them. It only keeps track of their successes and failures in meeting those expectations. And it keeps track in a very public, often a very humiliating manner, both for the child and potentially the child's family members if it's something that you're sending home to them. The next one is timeouts. I don't see this as often in the public school setting, but certainly in family child care, certainly if you're a parent, timeouts is another common strategy that's a less effective response for challenging behaviors. The next one is unclear requests. So unclear requests are things that teachers find themselves saying that just as that, it's not clear, right? It can lead to confusion or to a result in a behavior that you're not wanting. So for example, a teacher might say, nice hands, right? But child's hitting, slapping, clapping, making loud noises. Teachers will often say something like that, nice hands, okay? But this command, it might be used to mean any number of things, but it's not used for things that the teacher is observing that's not acceptable, right? Another common one is no thank you. So teachers often use that phrase in response to any number of behaviors. Generally, it's used to let children know that they're doing something that's not acceptable. How often have we heard this one? Use your words. Teachers often use this phrase to encourage children to express their feelings or needs through words as opposed to physical aggression. Okay. Another one is catch a bubble. So this is when a child or children are talking and you want them to stop talking. So they have to sort of blow up their cheeks like a bubble, and that forces them to keep their lips closed. Another one is make good choices. So another sort of generic phrase that adults use to encourage children to behave in acceptable ways in a variety of situations. Some ultimatums is another less effective response. We're not going outside until you pick up all the blocks, right? Talk about a power struggle. So now the child's not going to pick up all the blocks because now he's going to feel like he loses. The child or the teacher's not going outside until the child picks up the blocks because otherwise she loses. Meanwhile, the children are lined up at the door waiting to go outside, watching to see who's going to give in, right? So ultimatums are not an effective response to challenging behaviors. Requiring apologies, right? Say you're sorry, right? Child might not be sorry. He might not be feeling like what he did was wrong. Okay, so being mindful of that. Expecting empathy. A lot of children are coming to us from situations where they haven't practiced this before or have had to show this in situations before. So they may not know what it means to feel sorry. They may not know what it means to put themselves in another child's shoes. How would you like it if they did that to you? I don't even know what that means, right? Comparisons is another less effective response. Rewards is a huge one. I see this so commonly. So rewards come again from a place of power. And the person with the stickers, right, a sticker chart, for example, the person with the stickers has the power to decide without explanation of alternatives what constitutes perhaps a good day or whatever activity is the child's working on to get the stickers, okay? So those who receive a sticker, they can wear it like a badge of honor, right? They're walking around happy-go-lucky with a big sticker from their teacher. But those who don't are left simmering in the injustice of the situation. And if you determine to just give everybody a sticker, then that's not clear either, right? Now you're saying, you know, this student followed expectations and had a great day. I kind of am using my finger quotations around that great day. So they get a sticker. But the child who perhaps was highly disruptive during whole group, perhaps destroyed another child's work or was disruptive or disrespectful verbally, you know, they get a sticker just because your rule is everybody gets a sticker. So that's not sending the right message either, right? So rewards are often used to encourage children to behave in a certain way. Sit at circle time or you won't get a sticker today, right? That might work temporarily, but at some point, especially if the promise of a sticker or whatever the reward is used throughout the day, a child's going to decide that the required task, sitting, listening, walking, whatever it is not worth the promised reward, right? I tried so hard to walk down the hallway when really my legs wanted to run and all I got was a sticker, right? So typically, again, during the circle time, maybe example, typically if a circle time is engaging, right, if the circle time is fun, then a child won't need the assurance of a sticker to stick around and see what happens. Another common tactic that I've seen used that's not an effective response is empty threats. So for example, if you guys don't stop messing around, I'm canceling the Halloween party next week, right? Or I'll take all the toys out and you'll have nothing left to play with if you don't clean up the room right now, right? So this comes from a place of deep frustration. Words like these have emerged from many of our lips, right? My guilty as charged myself. But unfortunately, these types of threats do very little to change children's behavior or to teach them necessary social skills, right? Which is really the goal here. So most of the time, children might recognize when a teacher has no intention of following through on the promised action, right? Taking away a Halloween party can be more punishment on yourself as the educator than it could be on the child. They know that the teacher's not going to empty the room of the materials or take away a favorite book or a favorite game or something. They know the teachers live for those Halloween parties and those special days just as much, if not more, as the children do. So if the empty threats had an impact, than children who are not challenging social norms. Children would consistently follow the rules, right? They would fear that they'll pay the price for misdeeds that they didn't commit. So another common one, sending children to the office or sending them home. So in many cases, children exhibit challenging behaviors in response to social stressors, right? And the demands of the classroom, the demands of the educator that has the expectations on them. So it's the reality of today's world that a lot of children spend much of their time enclosed in the walls of the school. Maybe not in most recent times, but certainly up to this point, right? So for many, the stress of being in that environment and surrounded by so many other children, having to follow an externally dictated routine, it becomes too much and they lose control. So removing the child from the situation by sending them to the principal's office or calling the family to come and pick them up, right? It can provide, again, a temporary respite from the situation. It gives you a break, but much of the time, the child may stop the behavior when he's removed from the classroom, right? So if you continue doing that, I'm going to call Mr. Medor and he's going to come down and take you to the principal's office. Sure enough, you call the principal, he comes down and takes the child out and the child behaves lovely for the principal, okay? The response does little to teach the social skills that the child needs to succeed in the classroom, okay? It could ultimately backfire in the long run. So sometimes a child might need to be removed from the classroom for safety of others, or for the sort of the mental health of the teacher. But removal may be necessary during these times. It's important that it be used as sparingly as possible and with the understanding that it's not effective in teaching the child the skills that he or she needs to be successful in the early learning environment. And building off of that one is calling family members. So notifying family members or potentially threatening to notify the family members, right? I'll call mom, I'll send a letter home. It often compels family members to discipline children at home for challenging behaviors that occurred at school. So teachers and parents do this with the best of intentions. I know they do, but it often has little effect on children's behavior, especially young children. Okay, they have a limited ability to connect actions and consequences, especially when they're separated by such long periods of time. So for young children, even a couple of hours is a long time. If children are punished at home in the evening for something that happened during the school day, it's very unlikely to have an impact on their behavior. Okay, they're unable to understand the consequence administered so long after behavior occurred, right? It's not totally dissimilar with a young, an infant or a toddler or a pet, right? The consequence must follow the behavior. So while calling families will not impact the child's behavior in the classroom, it is important to partner with the family, right, when dealing with challenging behaviors, especially if the behavior is ongoing and does occur both at home and at school. So ongoing conversations that bring families and teachers together to discuss the challenges, perhaps seek solutions, make sure everyone's on the same page is very important. Okay, I don't want you to misunderstand the point there. So as opposed to simply informing a family of a child's behaviors, conversations with them should be as equal partners, right? To work together to support the child's experience in the classroom. And then the last bullet around effective responses that are really common when handling challenging behaviors is that of removing objects, right? So if two children are conflicting over an object, a toy, or what have you, simply removing it or removing the privilege of having it can be really non-effective, as opposed to sitting with them and discussing what's going on, which we're going to get to in a minute, so I don't want to go on too much there. I did want to mention one more also, and that's the common tactic, I guess, of, actually, I take that back. I don't want to mention that.
Can I make one point real quick about the removal? If you talked about sending a child to the principal's office or removing them from the classroom or sending them home, that also can be a positive reinforcement to the negative or challenging behavior. So if the child is enjoying being in the principal's office or going for a walk down the hall, it could be a trigger for that challenging behavior because they're getting a reward that they want. So keep in mind.
So now we've just mentioned sort of these common ways that we probably have seen or observed in our settings. And remember, I had asked you possibly to sort of keep a mental note if you were guilty of those things or not. I'm not going to ask you to reveal that, of course, but hopefully you were able to relate to some of those and agree that they're not effective responses. So now let's flip the switch. Now let's talk about things that we can be doing in the classroom with young children that are effective ways to respond to the behavior, okay? So the first one that I want to mention is redirection. So at its very base, at the core of redirection, it just means to move children's attention and energy from an undesired behavior to one that is more acceptable. That's it, okay? So when a child, for example, might be tearing up a book or tearing up a poster, okay, she might be indicating the desire to rip paper. Tearing in and of itself is not a challenging behavior, but the destruction of school property is. Okay, so when a child's doing something like that, a teacher can sort of nurture their social skills by responding. For example, if you tear that book, we can't enjoy the story anymore, right? If you rip up the pages, we can't see the pictures. Let's put it down. I'll repair it later. But come over here, I have a whole bunch of paper that you can tear, okay? So acknowledging that the child is doing something that you don't want them to do, stating why it's not okay to do it, but then redirecting their attention to something that they can do. So in that example, it was tearing a book, why they shouldn't be doing that, and here's something that you could tear, for example. Or here's another activity that you could do with blocks or with scissors or something unrelated to tearing, perhaps. Okay, does that make sense? Another effective way to respond to challenging behaviors would be to clearly define the desired expectation. So, for example, this is a common use of social stories. I know folks have seen we use social stories a lot with young children, especially to sort of help them through transitions. It sort of puts them in a relatable situation as a character. Sometimes we even use the child's actual picture to clearly define how we want them to be acting. So if a child is experiencing difficulty riding on the school bus, right, you might make a social story about what we want to see happening on a school bus, right? Mr. John drives us home from school every day. Mr. John greets me when I walk on the bus, and I have to sit still because if I'm hopping on the bus or climbing on the seats or running down the hallway, etc. Keeping it very simple, low vocabulary, low level word counts, things like that. And the key, though, of course, to a social story is actually reading and interacting with the child around it multiple times. It's not a one and done. They start to teach those expectations. Again, don't assume they know how to act and behave in various situations. You have to show them, be it through a story, through visual aids, through clear communication. Okay, so when teachers sort of directly state and teach their expectations for classroom behaviors, then children will feel more confident in being able to meet them, right? Children who feel confident, more likely to be successful, and less likely to need to communicate through challenging behaviors. Okay. So another effective way to respond might be that of a natural and connected consequences. So connect the action to the consequence. So if a child's at the sand table and they're getting sand all over the floor, right, remind them, whoops, remember, sand stays in the table. Come on, help me clean it up, right? So the consequence isn't for them to completely move to a whole nother station, but to help clean it up. Eventually, they'll get so sick of dumping sand on the table and having to constantly pick it up that the goal being that they'll stop doing it altogether. Okay. So try and relate the consequence as closely and as naturally relatable to the challenging behavior as possible, as opposed to, dumping the sand now, we're going to have to pick that up later, right? No, you pick it up now, right? You've done this, now we fix it. The next one I wanted to mention too was this idea of repetition, consistency, and modeling. Okay, so address the behavior every time it's exhibited. Okay, children are going to copy what they see, not what they're told. So what I mean by that is if the rule in the classroom is that you sit at the table to eat your snack or you sit at the table to eat your breakfast or lunch, then teachers themselves shouldn't be walking around and eating. Right? That's not teaching them and modeling for them what you want. So I have to sit and eat my apple, but the teacher can walk around and eat her bowl of cereal, right? They're gonna eventually start to sort of raise an eyebrow at that, okay? If the rule in the classroom is to walk, right, and not use running feet, then that needs to be repeated for every child that potentially runs. Not just the one child that does it 8 times a day, right, but even the child that might do it once every 2 weeks. Being consistent and modeling and repeating what the expectation is going to be very important in effectively responding to challenging behaviors. With that said, I'm going to kind of go on another route. Choose your battles, okay? Think of behavior sort of along a continuum. So if you have one child who is consistently hitting, consistently throwing violent tantrums, right? And then that child also dumps sand from the sand table on the floor, right? You need to choose which battle you're going to fight first. So obviously the ones that are potentially dangerous to themselves or dangerous to peers are going to be more important. So children have a lot to remember when it comes to the rules that they must follow as being a part of a classroom. So children that are not going to follow all the rules all the time, right? And you know of some of these children that are that way. So the teachers need to decide which rules are the most important for a child's well-being and focus on those, especially if the child's struggling with multiple challenging behaviors. So again, choosing your battles, it just means that instead of trying to correct all behaviors at the same time, look at the challenging behaviors sort of along a continuum. And when a child's displaying many challenging behaviors, a teacher focuses on those that are detrimental to the physical safety of the child. Okay, the next one is going to be acknowledging effort, okay, being clear and direct. So part of helping children learn is encouraging, recognizing, and acknowledging their attempts to exhibit desired behaviors. Encouragement often includes empathizing, we've said that before, okay, empathizing with the difficulty that some children may be encouraging in a particular situation. So when children are waiting in a hallway, for example, right, as they take turns maybe to use the bathroom or to use the water fountain before they go outside, the teacher might encourage them by saying, "You guys are becoming experts at waiting. I know waiting is hard. Who here thinks waiting is boring? Let's all growl to show how we feel about waiting." That felt good. Now, what song should we sing while we're hanging out here? Okay, so in that example, the teacher's teaching the group about waiting by naming what they're doing, noticing they're being successful, empathizing with their plight, right? Like she doesn't want to be out there waiting either. Providing them with an outlet for their frustration, in this example, they growled, and suggesting an activity to help make the waiting easier. As in all other areas of curriculum, teaching is more effective when teachers are clear and direct as they introduce expectations for children, okay? And as they acknowledge the children's efforts in becoming and meeting those expectations. So the last one that I want to talk about from the book around effective ways to respond to behaviors is to interrupt behaviors, okay? So look for signs of oncoming behaviors. Sometimes children give physical or other indicators that challenging behaviors are about to happen, right? Especially as the school year goes along, you start to recognize these more and more. So a child might tense their shoulders before throwing inappropriate objects. They might utter a particular phrase before dissolving into a violent tantrum. Okay, these indicators give teachers a chance to interrupt the behavior and distract the child. Okay, so for example, if a teacher notices a girl tensing her shoulders just before she's about to throw a chair, the teacher can step in and stop the behavior by saying something like, "It looks like you're getting angry. Let's put the chair down," right? "This is not safe. I bet we can find something positive to do with that anger. Would you like to throw socks or run in place with me or go for a walk or do a lap around the gym," right? Whatever you think might be helpful. Without directly addressing the potential chair throwing, the teacher's providing an acceptable behavior to replace the unsafe one. So the teacher's also sending the message that being angry is okay. Okay, no, nothing wrong with that, as long as it's expressed in ways that do not injure yourself, right? Or others or materials for that matter. So acknowledging what they're doing, stating it's not safe, giving a positive outlet for that, okay, is a great way to effectively respond to a challenging behavior. So I guess I just want to kind of open it up for a minute or two. What are your thoughts on those? I call them sort of little pearls of ways to respond. Is it realistically something that you could see yourself doing in your classroom, or have you found other ways to effectively respond to students' behavior? Please feel free to unmute yourself and chat, or use the chat box as well.
So I will just throw out there has been some chatting in the chat box about different social emotional curriculums, that sort of thing. But also, I'm trying to find it. Grace was talking about a podcast that their team watched about what they say and how they say it, and how one of the points was talking about how to ask yourself if you would say the same thing to a colleague or a group of colleagues. So we were just talking about how the interaction should be respectful and positive with children, just like with adults. The body language or the harsh tones can also be a trigger for children.
Yes. Yeah, that's what we were talking about during the child interactions discussion, right? Was what you're bringing to the table, not just verbally, but physically, right? What is your body language saying to that child? And similarly, we can start to recognize that in other children as we get to know them and start to pick up on maybe their habits or their cues that they're giving us, that we can then recognize and say, I noticed your shoulders are getting tense, or I noticed you curled your lip and made that angry look with your eyes. You know, what's going on? I could tell you're angry, prior to them exerting the anger in a potentially unsafe way.
The next comment is, don't assume that you know just because you're educators. And I think that's important. And it doesn't take long to really get to know the children in your classroom and kind of what their nonverbal and verbal sort of cues are, and who to watch and when to stay close and that sort of thing. But yeah, don't assume that you know, or even know the reason why.
Right.
A child could, start something that has never had a concern before and just have a bad day or a bad morning, that sort of thing. So
absolutely. Yeah. Great.
And just one more, asking open-ended questions and providing examples can be helpful in forming relationships, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always encourage open-ended questions, even for all children, not just in situations where you're trying to teach social skills, but asking children to explain their thinking and explain what they're feeling is highly more effective than just saying, are you angry? Are you this? Or is this, is that, where a yes, no answer might be the response, right? We are always wanting children to answer with more than one words. Yes. Okay. So that ate up the good half of our time. So talking about ways that are less effective and talking about ways that are effective to respond to challenging behaviors. So now we're going to flip into a little bit around conflict resolution. So now we're starting to talking about where there's potentially more than one child involved in a challenging situation. So still keeping in mind that we're wanting to educate and acknowledge and teach the social skills needed in these situations. So I think we can all agree that we know or can think of students in our settings that have challenging behaviors independently. What I mean by that is they tend to do it to themselves. It doesn't often involve another student. But then there's also those situations that I'm sure we can all recall that have involved more than one child. Okay, so let's talk about ways that we can help resolve conflict in the classroom. So in the book, Uncover the Roots of Challenging Behaviors, she talks about 7 steps to conflict resolution. So the first step, which seems pretty obvious, is stopping the conflict, right? So when a conflict arises, we move toward it. Okay, we get down on the children's level. We neutralize the situation. Okay, again, your body language, your presence matters right now. Okay, it might mean calming down a child who's upset. It might mean separating children who are fighting, holding on to a toy that's at the center of this conflict, right? Soothing the children and saying, I'm here to support you. I know we can work together to solve this, okay? So vocalize why you're there in a way that the child can understand and relate to, okay? So step one, stop the conflict. I'm just gonna move this up. Okay, step two, understand the conflict. So assure the children that they'll have the opportunity to state their sides of the story, right? You want to make sure that you give each or all children involved a moment to share their side of the story. Give them the time to recount what happened, okay? So I'm here to support you. I know we can work on together to solve this. Marcy, tell me what's happening. Joey, tell me what's happening, okay? So once you've gotten that done, then we can move to step three, which is restating the conflict. So here, again, as I often say this with young children, use as few words as possible to restate your understanding of what's at the core of the conflict. So you might say something like, okay, so I hear, or what I hear is happening is that you both want the yellow block. Is that correct? Okay. So if each child agrees that that is truly what's wrong, then you move on to the next step. But if not, then we have to keep working the process until they all agree on the core of the conflict, right? And that might take some more finessing. That might take some more scaffolding. So Marcy, you're telling me that you want the yellow block, but Joey, you're telling me that Marcy stepped on your structure, right? So they're both coming at it with a different understanding of why they're conflicting in the first place. So you've got to be as clear and restate the problem as possible so that they can understand. So now Joey's like, oh, I didn't know that's why you were mad. And Marcy's thinking, oh, I didn't know that's why you were mad, right? But if they agree, I want the yellow block, no, I want the yellow block, this is the problem, then the next step is going to be step 4, which is brainstorming and selecting a solution. So at this step, you're going to ask the children for ideas about how they might resolve the conflict. See what they think. See what's going to solve it for them, right? We talked earlier in another session about not giving them the solution, giving them the chance to give you what's going to work, okay? It's a chance for them to sort of verbally list out any and all of the possible solutions for them. Even if the solutions they suggest are unrealistic, right? In this step, it's the teacher's job just to listen and restate the ideas. So other children even might get involved in this step and offer their ideas for the resolution as well, and that's great. So as children come up with solutions, check with the others to see if the solution is acceptable. So if you're here and the conflict is that Marcy and Joey both want the yellow block, right? So Marcy, I hear you want the yellow block. Joey, I hear you want the yellow block. Is that the problem? Yes, yes. Okay, what are we going to do to fix this? I know that we can work together to get to a solution for this. Marcy, what could we do? And Marcy might say, I get to use the yellow block, and when I'm done, I give it to Joey. And then he might say, Joey, this is Marcy's solution. Does that work for you? And he might say, no, that doesn't work for me. I want the yellow block. Okay. So that's not going to work because you both want it. What else could we do? Right? And then Nicole in the background might say, they can have this yellow block. I'm not using it. Oh, will that solve the solution? Thank you, Nicole. See, I'm the good guy. Right? So maybe that'll work, but it might not. So constantly restating solutions, taking ideas from others until you've reached a solution that everybody's happy with. So go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, you may touch on this later, I'm not sure, but in situations like that, using visual solution cards with words and pictures and ideas to help the children along and kind of give them the ideas and give them the vocabulary and that sort of thing is also a really good idea.
Yeah, thanks. So we've talked about stopping the conflict, understanding the conflict, restating the conflict, and then now we're moving to brainstorming and selecting a solution. And then this shouldn't surprise anybody, but we're going to restate the solution. So Marcy is going to use the blue block in her building and give the yellow block to Joey. Okay, and then maybe both Rachel and Joey will have a yellow block, or is everyone good with that? So whatever the solution you've come to, restating it and getting agreement from all involved. Okay, and if all children are on board, then the main part of this process of conflict resolution is basically complete. Okay, so the next step, though, there's still 2 more steps. And the next one is to affirm the process. So once the children have reached a solution, congratulate them on their work, right? Tell them, thank you. Thank you for working hard to work together and to find a solution that everybody's happy with. Okay, some teachers might even encourage children to shake hands or a high five or something like that. But acknowledge that they were part of this process and it worked. And then perhaps the most important step to conflict resolution is step 7, the follow-up, right? So once sort of the classroom peace is restored, okay, it's tempting for us as the adults to forget about the situation, forget that it even happened, right? However, follow-up is an important step because it makes sure that everyone feels that they were heard and that the agreed upon solution is still in place. So maybe after a few minutes, you might check in with each of the children that were involved with something like, you did a great job working through that conflict. Thank you. Is everything still going okay? Okay, so just reaching back out to them, touching base that their efforts were acknowledged, it's working. A few minutes later, it's still working, okay? That makes sense? Okay. So another strategy around conflict resolution that Michelle Salcido in the book talks about is that it's called a monster response. And so the word monster is actually an acronym. It's probably easier to see, but the M-O is for move. So move. And then the N is notice. The S is stop. So we have move, notice, stop, and then we have teach, and then we have redirect. So the monster response is when the teacher moves, notices, stops, teaches, and redirects. So an early childhood teacher needs to be, ready, right, at all times to respond to challenging behaviors that will or could inevitably occur in the classroom or whatever setting you're working in. So the goal, though, of a response should be to stop the behavior as quickly and calmly as possible and to protect all the children that are involved, okay? And we also, of course, want to avoid the destruction of potentially any materials. So an effective response also serves to reassure the child exhibiting the behavior, as well as all of the children, and allows the teacher to gather information about what might be contributing. So the monster response, I'll break it down by each letter. The M for move, that's when a teacher sees a challenging behavior, right? And the first step is to move calmly and quickly toward the situation. So similar to step 1 in the conflict resolution, right? Stopping it, so here we are moving to it, okay? Sometimes I've even heard teachers say that it's helpful for them to give like a quick self-affirmation, like, I got this, or I can handle this, or, oh man, here we go again. It's okay, breathe, I can do this, right? So the N for notice is while responding to the behavior, the teacher notices whatever he or she can about the situation, okay? So if you can, try and notice what led up to the behavior. Too few materials, too many materials, something scary, something sudden, something impulsive, okay? Try and notice what might have caused it. Sometimes we call this the antecedent, right? What happened before the behavior happened? And what emotions does the child appear to be feeling? Okay, so if you can start to notice, are these signs of anger, pain, frustration? Okay, try and identify those as well. So the S in monster is stop. So our next goal, once the teacher has moved and noticed, is going to be the teacher will sort of reaches the situation, and the first step is to stop whatever's happening. So again, back to step 1 and step 2 in conflict resolution. Okay, it might entail sort of gently stopping a child's arm from hitting. It might mean holding an object that's the cause of an argument, or removing a toy that's about to be thrown by a child, right? So whatever you need to do to calmly stop the behavior. And then we flip the switch on the child. right? Now we start to teach. So as the teacher stops the behavior, he or she can then take that opportunity to teach the child why the behavior is not acceptable in the first place in the classroom. Okay? The teacher should use, again, as few words as possible to explain why they're intervening in a situation. Okay, so you might say something like, you almost threw that toy, it could have broke the window. Or you almost hit Nicole, that would have really hurt her body. Or whatever the case may be. And then we're going to shift to redirect. The R in monster is to redirect. So the final step here is to redirect the child into a more appropriate behavior while delivering a short message on what is acceptable. I see that you're angry. You almost threw the toy that could have broke the window. Let's go build a structure, or let's go throw socks in a basket, or whatever the case may be, redirecting them to a more appropriate behavior. When teachers use the monster response, they're strategically addressing challenging behaviors in a way that teaches as opposed to punishes, okay? It seeks to understand what's happening rather than to ostracize the child. So all of these behaviors are ways, remember, that children communicate. They'll continue until the communication is understood and addressed. So if I'm hitting, trying to communicate something, and until you move, notice, stop, teach, and redirect, they're going to continue that behavior until you notice and understand why it's happening, as opposed to punish and ostracize it. Okay. So I'm going to stop there. We've talked about less effective, more effective, conflict resolution, and the monster response, excuse me. And all of that was done just by you sheerly listening to my voice and not being able to see and follow along. So I'm going to sort of try and strategize how I could get all of you this PowerPoint, because I do think it would be helpful if you ever need to refer back to it later. So I can try and do that likely through the certificate part of things. Before I move on to that, does anybody have any questions or concerns that you would like to bring up?
So I'm going to throw out one that was in the chat from Alexandria because I thought it was interesting. She wrote, how would you encourage or affirm the conflict resolution with a student who does not believe in the positive? For instance, a student who has a negative perception of themselves and is triggered by compliments or positive regard. And so I didn't an answer, but I also wanted to defer that one to you.
So yeah, and I would open up to anybody.
Child who needs foundations on compliments, positivity, positive expectations before he or she can actually be expected to understand conflict resolution. Because if they don't have that foundation first, they may just not be ready for the next step.
Yeah. So Christina, I see your question about the monster approach and if I have an example of this in action. So there are a few examples that are given in the book. There's one example, two examples, two. So I'd be happy to try and reference you to that. I'll have to give it some thought as far as, I don't know if maybe I can take a picture of it and upload it on Google or something. I don't have access to a printer or scanner even at my home office. So it's a little tricky, but I can try and see what I can do for that. So our new tried and true way of receiving certificates is through, let me see if this is going to work, this link that I will repeatedly put it into the group chat. So this link will bring you right to the survey, and then at the end of the survey is another link to take you right to the certificate. Yes, so Jamie, I see your comment there around modeling, and this is huge. You talk about it here in your example. It looks like in middle school. And again, you just can't assume that children know how to act and behave in these situations. Modeling what is acceptable is key. I mean, that's even key for 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? Modeling language, modeling interactions, modeling how to build a tower, modeling how to scoop sand, modeling how to wash your hands appropriately. It's huge. It's a huge, huge strategy for getting the behavior that we want out of children. So I have discussed all the points that I wanted to today. Our next meeting together is on Wednesday, June 3rd, again at 2 o'clock. And this is going to be the 5th and final learning series presentation. And that's going to look more closely at the class observation tool. This is something that we use at the Department of Education when we are monitoring public pre-K classrooms. And it's really beneficial for teachers and ed techs and administrators alike to understand that tool and to understand what we're looking for within that tool. So Marcy's going to give us a presentation and have some discussion points around that. And once you've accessed the link, which is here in the chat box, today's session was titled Proactive Strategies. And once you've accessed the link, you are free to go and enjoy the rest of this hopefully beautiful day where you are.